$1 billion gone, vanished in the name of border security. And at the center of it all stood Pete Hegseth, smiling, defiant, convinced that his television charm and patriotic catchphrases could shield him from scrutiny. While ordinary Americans worked double shifts just to afford rent and groceries, while veterans he claimed to champion slept on the streets, he waved the flag as a cover for greed. In the glare of courtroom lights, his polished image cracked. Protesters gathered outside, their chants echoing against marble walls. "Not in our name!" Their voices clashed with the smug silence of a man who believed himself untouchable. The camera zoomed in on that smirk, the expression of someone who thought power was permanent and accountability optional, but America knows betrayal when it sees it. You don't drain 1 billion taxpayer dollars into shadows without leaving footprints. You don't weaponize fear and call it patriotism without awakening suspicion, and soon suspicion became revelation. Hidden files, whispered testimonies, and damning receipts began to surface, each more explosive than the last. Because no matter how high the wall of lies, truth has a way of climbing over. And when it landed in this case, the nation gasped. The number wasn't just abstract, it was visceral. $1 billion could have funded classrooms where teachers dig into their own pockets for pencils and books. It could have built shelters. For veterans who once wore the uniform Hegseth wraps himself in on television, it could have eased the crushing tax burdens on families who wonder if they can afford both groceries and gas in the same week. Instead, it was siphoned away into a hollow promise, a border project that existed more as propaganda than protection, and that is the cruelest part of the scam. Hegseth didn't just waste money, he manipulated America's fears, dangling the idea of danger at the border to justify lining pockets and fueling careers. Patriotism became a weapon, sharpened and pointed at the very people it was meant to defend. He told millions to believe in walls, in fortresses, in simple slogans, while quietly ensuring that the real walls went up between the wealthy and the struggling, between truth and illusion. This wasn't merely financial waste. It was betrayal dressed in red, white, and blue. A betrayal that reached into the core of national identity, exploiting the same families he claimed to protect. And as the whispers turned into evidence, the stakes grew higher. Because the scandal wasn't about one man. What unfolded next would shatter the credibility of not just Hegseth, but the entire political machine behind him. To understand the scandal, you have to understand the man at its center. Pete Hegseth has long crafted an image as the polished patriot, Fox News favorite, veteran-turned-pundit, a man who drapes himself in the flag and speaks in thunderous tones about honor, duty, and defending America's borders. On the surface, it's a compelling picture. He stands tall, his voice steady, invoking the weight of sacrifice and service. To the casual viewer, he looks like the embodiment of unwavering patriotism, but peel back the gloss, and the contradictions spill out like cracks in a polished statue. For every speech on service before self, there were quiet dealings behind. The curtain, whispers of contracts handed to cronies, dollars rerouted into shadows. His calls for accountability on television rang hollow against the reality of how he dismissed questions in private, brushing aside criticism with arrogance, mocking those who dared to probe deeper. Hegseth thrived on bluster. When confronted with evidence, he laughed it off. When challenged in debates, he leaned into smug one-liners, relying on volume over substance. He wielded patriotism like a shield, daring anyone to question his sincerity. In his world, waving the flag was enough to silence dissent. Nowhere was this clearer than in his obsession with the border. Night after night, he thundered about walls and invasions, about protecting real Americans from supposed outsiders. He framed it as life or death, civilization versus chaos. But behind the rhetoric was a darker reality, contracts inflated, money funneled, allies enriched. The border wasn't a mission, it was a business. And Hegseth was at the center, smiling as the checks cleared. His arrogance wasn't just a personality trait, it was strategy. He believed that his status insulated him, that as long as he shouted louder than the critics, as long as he wrapped himself in red, white, and blue, no one would dare peek behind the curtain. But every facade has a breaking point. For years he cultivated the image of the untouchable patriot. Yet the deeper investigators dug, the more his contradictions stood exposed. He thought he could hide behind the flag. But flags can't cover billion-dollar holes. While Hegseth basked in studio lights and patriotic slogans, another story was unfolding far from the cameras, in quiet offices, dimly lit kitchens, and late-night newsrooms. This is where the real heroes began their work. They weren't armed with television contracts or political clout. They carried laptops, notebooks, and the heavy burden of truth. Among them were investigative journalists who had grown tired of watching billions disappear into shadows. They sifted through endless records, piecing together trails others dismissed. As coincidence, every redacted line, every missing receipt was another clue. They knew what they were chasing was dangerous, but they also knew silence was worse. There were watchdog groups, patriotic in their own right, who believed defending America meant holding even its loudest patriots accountable. They wrote letters that went unanswered, warnings that were ignored. Still, they persisted. Not because it was easy, but because they understood what was at stake: democracy's credibility, taxpayers' dignity, and the promise that corruption does not go unchallenged. And then there were the whistleblowers, people inside the machine. They risked careers, reputations, even their safety to leak slivers of the truth. They spoke in hushed tones over encrypted calls, slipping documents into plain envelopes, trusting that someone out there would listen. Their bravery was not loud. It was quiet, steady, and relentless. Together they became David standing against Goliath. Against Hegseth's smirk, they carried evidence. Against his arrogance, they carried patience. Against his flag-waving speeches, they carried receipts and courage. The imbalance of power was staggering. One man backed by wealth, networks and bluster versus ordinary citizens armed only with persistence. And yet their determination burned brighter. Night after night, files were cross-checked, whispers followed, loose threads tugged until the fabric of the scheme began to unravel. Most people would have given up, but these heroes understood that. Every great betrayal eventually leaves behind a paper trail, and then one document buried deep in the files would change everything. The showdown could not be avoided forever. Cameras rolled, microphones buzzed, and the stage was set. Hearings, interviews, and primetime confrontations where the truth would finally be forced into the open. Pete Hegseth strode in with his trademark swagger, confident that charm and bravado would drown out scrutiny. When pressed on the billion-dollar shortfall, he waved it off with mocking laughter, dismissing critics as partisan hacks and ungrateful elites. Every insult was designed to turn the spotlight away from him, to make his accusers appear petty or political. But across from him, the heroes of this story, journalists, watchdogs, whistleblowers, didn't flinch. They came armed, not with bluster, but with facts. One by one, documents were introduced, invoices that didn't match, contracts with shell companies, payments funneled to cronies. Each detail stacked higher, the pressure building with quiet force. The atmosphere shifted. What began as routine questioning grew tense, the air thick with anticipation. Even the audience, both in the room and across the nation, leaned closer to their screens. Every smirk from Hegseth now looked less like confidence and more like desperation. He doubled down, louder, sharper, desperate to turn the tide. But arrogance only echoes for so long, until the moment the evidence landed on the table. The room fell silent as the evidence was slid across the table. A single folder, ordinary in appearance, yet heavy with the weight of truth. Inside it lay the breakdown, the trail that would rip through every layer of Pete Hegseth's carefully crafted facade. The whistleblowers and investigators had done their work. Now it was time to show the world. The first page was simple enough, an invoice. On its face, it looked like any other government transaction, but the numbers didn't add up. A contract billed for millions in construction services, yet no wall, no barrier, no fence had ever been built. Only a barren stretch of desert, untouched except for a few abandoned trucks and rusting machinery. The audience shifted in their seats, murmurs spreading. Next came the contracts. Shell organizations, hastily formed companies with no prior history, suddenly awarded multi-million-dollar deals. Their addresses trace back not to professional offices but to P.O. boxes and vacant lots. Each connection led closer to friends, allies, and cronies of Hegseth's inner circle. A pause. The investigator raised their eyes to the panel, letting the silence linger. The cameras zoomed in on Hegseth's face. The smirk was still there, but thinner now, forced. He tried to laugh, to shrug it off as bureaucratic confusion, but his voice cracked slightly at the edges. The next reveal came harder. Emails. Direct communication between Hegseth's associates and the companies in question. Phrases like, "No need to worry about oversight," and "We'll handle the press spin." The words hit like hammer blows. The crowd gasped audibly, the sound ricocheting through the chamber. Page after page, the narrative unfolded. Money meant for border security had flowed like a river into the pockets of insiders. Millions for phantom labor, millions more. For consulting services that produced nothing but empty reports, and still more for equipment that never arrived. The tally climbed higher with every exhibit until the number was unmistakable. Over $1 billion drained away in the name of patriotism. The tension in the room was unbearable. Viewers at home gripped their remotes, unable to look away. Lawmakers shifted in their seats, some furious, some stunned into silence. Even the press corps, used to scandal after scandal, sat wide-eyed at the sheer audacity of the scheme, and through it all, the hero figure, calm, unshaken, narrated the fraud with precision. No shouting, no grandstanding, just steady, undeniable. Truth. Each word stripped away Hegseth's armor, exposing not the patriot he claimed to be, but a profiteer hiding behind slogans. The final reveal came with devastating clarity. A single memo, signed off by Hegseth himself, approving a transfer of funds to one of the shell organizations. His signature stared back at him from the screen, undeniable and damning. For the first time, his voice caught in his throat. The smirk faltered. His eyes darted, searching for an escape that wasn't there. The chamber erupted. Gasps, shouts, disbelief. Protesters outside roared as the news hit the airwaves. Social media exploded in real time, hashtags igniting like wildfire. The narrative Hegseth had controlled for years was collapsing in front of millions, and there he sat, rattled, cornered, stripped of his defenses. No slogan could shield him now. No flag could cover the truth laid bare. The hero leaned forward, steady and resolute. Truth had spoken louder than arrogance. For the first time, Pete Hegseth had nothing left to say. In the aftermath of the revelations, the noise slowly gave way to clarity. The billion-dollar scandal wasn't just about corruption or about one man's arrogance. It was about the power of truth to rise no matter how deeply it is buried. Justice may stumble, but it never sleeps. And when it wakes, it does so with a force that no smirk, no slogan, no television monologue can withstand. This story is bigger than Pete Hegseth. It's bigger than the fraud. It's a reminder that patriotism cannot be measured in dollars stolen or walls promised but never built. True patriotism is sacrifice without profit, service without expectation, and accountability without excuse. Those who cloak themselves in the flag to hide their greed only cheapen the very ideals they pretend to defend. What this moment proves is something profoundly American. Accountability is not a weakness, it's our strength. Courage is contagious. When one whistleblower speaks, another joins. When one investigator refuses to look away, others rally. And when truth is spoken plainly, the people listen. This isn't just about $1 billion, it's about who we are, and who we refuse to let lead us astray. And as long as dignity stands taller than deceit, America will endure. Pete Hegseth was caught, not just by investigators, not just by receipts and contracts, but by something far greater. The truth. And truth, once revealed, cannot be silenced. His billion-dollar scam wasn't only about wasted money. It was about arrogance exposed, corruption unmasked, and a reminder that no one who betrays the people can ever truly escape accountability. But this story doesn't end here. It lives on in what we do next. If you believe America deserves better than lies and billion-dollar scams, share this story. Don't let this moment vanish into tomorrow's headlines. Make it part of the national conversation. Shine a light. Where others would rather keep the shadows, I want to hear from you. What does real patriotism mean to you? Do you think justice will reach the highest offices, or will the machine try to bury this scandal? Drop your voice in the comments, because silence only protects the corrupt, while speaking out strengthens the honest. Let this be more than just a video. Let it be a movement, a reminder that the American spirit is not for sale, that dignity will always outlast deception, and that courage grows stronger when it's shared, because in the end, truth doesn't whisper, it roars.